When Star Trek Generations came out in 1994, it did a lot better than anyone expected. In fact, it did just about as well at the box office as Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country did, leading many to believe that the Next Generation crew seemed primed for a long run on the big screen. Up to this point, Paramount's main goal, as far as making Star Trek movies, was this: keep the budgets as low as possible. After all, the series never did all that well internationally, so there was no reason to give them an A budget.
I believe I speak for everyone here, sir, when I say, to hell with our orders.
But that thinking changed, for a while anyway, when Paramount went ahead and greenlit the most ambitious Star Trek movie since the motion picture, Star Trek: First Contact.
So unnecessary.
Of all the enemies that the Next Generation crew faced on the Enterprise D, none were more feared or iconic than the Borg. A hive collective of cyborgs that consisted of assimilated humans. From their first appearance in the episode Q Who, the Borg became a favorite. They were scary, but most of all, they looked really cool. Cyborgs were hot at the moment, thanks to RoboCop and the Terminator, and the Borg instantly struck a chord with fans.
I've never seen that kind of technology.
That's because it hasn't been invented yet.
What?
There's more I have to tell you. Come on.
In fact, one might say it was the Borg that defined Star Trek: The Next Generation. As most admit, the third season finale / fourth season premiere, The Best of Both Worlds Part 1 and 2, is when the Next Generation truly came into its own. In this landmark two-part episode, Captain Picard is kidnapped and assimilated into the Borg, becoming Locutus of Borg. The Enterprise crew rescues him, and the Borg machinery is stripped from Picard, but he's mentally scarred by the ordeal, and for the rest of the show's run, he becomes a much more vulnerable hero than the franchise had seen up to that point. Not only did Picard carry with him the trauma of being with the Borg, but he also knew that, as Locutus, he played a role in the Battle of Wolf 359, in which 11,000 people were killed, including the wife of Benjamin Sisko, the protagonist of the Star Trek spin-off Deep Space Nine. Despite their popularity, the Borg weren't often featured on The Next Generation, both for budgetary reasons and due to the fact that the showrunners wanted to keep them scary. With a feature film budget at their disposal, the time was right to bring them back, with the backstory from The Best of Both Worlds essential to what became the most action-packed Star Trek movie of all time.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, but we're closing. And you do understand, we have a strict dress code, so if you boys don't leave right now,
The creative team from Star Trek Generations, including producer Rick Berman and writers Brannon Braga and Ronald D. Moore, were left intact for Star Trek First Contact, but they all knew they were writing a much bigger film than the last one. In addition to the Borg, Paramount wanted time travel to be worked in, so they decided to tell the story of First Contact, where Zefram Cochrane created the first warp vessel and leads to humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial life, in this case, the Vulcans.
Live long and prosper.
Tom Hanks, who was a major Star Trek fan, almost played Cochrane, only for James Cromwell, who had just broken out in the film Babe, to win the role.
That'll do, Pig. That'll do.
Paramount opted to give the filmmakers a pretty hefty $45 million budget, which was $10 million more than Generations cost. The hope was to hire a major action director to take on the film, with Ridley Scott and John McTiernan approached, but Patrick Stewart was unimpressed, as no one really seemed to know Star Trek.
You son of a bitch.
This really isn't the time.
Jonathan Frakes, Riker himself, was hired, as he had proven himself as a director on all three current Star Trek series, including The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. And hey, it worked out pretty well for Leonard Nimoy, didn't it?
Let's rock and roll!
6.
Looking at the movie now, what's remarkable about First Contact is how different it was tonally from what the other films had done. Jonathan Frakes gave the franchise a much-needed boost of testosterone, with the film feeling distinctly inspired by James Cameron's Aliens. It's a much more action-packed movie than usual, even earning the franchise its first ever PG-13 rating. This edge was meant to bring in non-Star Trek fans, but I remember distinctly, as a Trek-loving nerd in school, overhearing my bullies say,
"Yeah, Star Trek sucks, but that First Contact movie is kinda cool."
One thing they did was toughen up Patrick Stewart's Picard. On the small screen, a brainy, erudite hero is great, but no one could deny he was blown off the screen by William Shatner in Star Trek Generations.
No! No!
For the sequel, Patrick Stewart showed off his biceps and became an action hero, taking on the Borg because, as in any great action movie, this time it's personal.
The line must be drawn here. This far, no farther. I will make them pay for what they've done.
Riker, Troy, and Geordi got the B story, where they have to sober up a drunk Cochrane so he can make his flight, with Picard, Data, and Worf
assimilate this.
kicking some Borg ass on the Enterprise. Picard even gets use of a Tommy gun at one point.
I think you got him.
The supporting cast is solid, with Alfre Woodard great as Lily Sloan, Cochrane's assistant, who, it turns out, is a war veteran and proves to be an asset to Picard and the crew when she winds up stranded on the vessel, even having a bit of a flirty will they or won't they thing going with Picard.
I envy you. The world you're going to.
I envy you. Taking these first steps into a new frontier.
Cromwell steals scenes as the drunk, self-loathing Cochrane, but it's Alice Krige, who everyone remembers as being one of the greatest Star Trek villains ever.
Don't be frightened.
I'm not frightened.
Her Borg Queen is strangely alluring, despite her slimy H.R. Geiger-inspired look. It's hard not to think the Borg Queen is, well, kind of sexy. She even becomes a quasi-love interest for Data, with him briefly looking like he's been seduced over to the Borg.
And for a time, I was tempted by her offer.
How long a time?
0.68 seconds, sir.
Along with the more action-packed vibe goes the Jerry Goldsmith soundtrack, with him returning to the franchise for the first time since Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. His hard-driving music makes this a lot more cinematic than Generations was, which is helped by the fact that the crew has completely redesigned outfits now that they're stationed aboard the more battle-ready Enterprise E.
Computer, mid-21st century civilian clothing. Number 1, you have the bridge.
The movie hit theaters at the perfect time, syncing up with the 30th anniversary of the franchise. It proved to be the biggest hit in the series since Star Trek The Voyage Home, grossing $92 million domestically, and even becoming the biggest international hit in the franchise to date, making $146 million internationally. It would prove to be a high watermark for the franchise, with none of the follow-up Next Generation movies faring nearly as well at the box office.
Ignore it! We'll be fine!
It was a short-lived success, but a success nonetheless, and for many of us, it remains a defining entry into the Star Trek canon.
I suspect our future is there waiting for us.
Course laid in, sir.
Make it so.